Hello, my name is Russell Killingsworth. I'm a veterinarian with an embryo transfer practice in Shamrock, Texas. Today we'd like to share how we are using real-time video data to determine embryo survival of cryopreservation. Cryopreservation of embryos has been instrumental in the growth of the embryo transfer industry. There were over 764,000 frozen embryo transfers in cattle in 2022 worldwide. Cryopreservation of embryos allows for storage of genetic material for use at a later date. It makes more efficient utilization of recipients, helps us to manage breeding strategies for desired calving dates, and facilitates marketing and transport of genetics. However, toxicity of the cryoprotective agents and cryo damage due to intracellular ice formation are two factors which can lead to lower pregnancy rates with frozen embryos. Today, most embryos are frozen in ethylene glycol because these are the direct transfer embryos, and we seldom look at the thawed embryo before it is transferred. The objective of our first study was to use graphic image processing and machine learning techniques to evaluate embryo health post-cryopreservation. In this study, we used donated in vivo derived embryos which had been frozen in either glycerol or ethylene glycol. The embryos were thawed and rehydrated. A 30-second video was recorded, and then the embryos were incubated and reevaluated for continued development 24 hours later. After incubation, 79% of the embryos frozen in glycerol and 69% of the embryos frozen in ethylene glycol continued to develop and improve at least one stage of development. In an attempt to measure the differences between these embryos, we used the graphic image processing technique of image subtraction. In this process, the computer compares each frame of the video to the previous frame. Any pixel change in the image from frame to frame is displayed as a white pixel, and the number of changes is counted. We calculated the mean pixel change as morphokinetic activity. Results show that embryos which advanced in development, here in the green box, had higher morphokinetic activity than embryos which stalled in development. Embryos frozen in glycerol which continued to develop demonstrated the highest morphokinetic activity post-cryopreservation. In both freezing methods, glycerol and ethylene glycol, the embryos which developed had higher activity levels than those embryos which stalled in each freezing method. It would certainly be valuable to know the viability after thawing, but it would be even more beneficial if we could predict which embryos will have a higher probability of survival before we begin the freezing process. In our second study, videos of embryos were recorded prior to freezing. The embryos were frozen in ethylene glycol and then subsequently transferred into recipients at a later date. Pregnancy data was recorded. In this study, 95 embryos were thawed and transferred, resulting in 53 pregnancies, or a 55.8% pregnancy rate. We performed image subtraction processes on the videos, and again, embryos which made pregnancies, here in the green box, had higher morphokinetic activity levels than those embryos which did not result in pregnancies. If we compare pregnancy outcomes based on activity levels, we see embryos with the lowest activity establish the fewer pregnancies. Also, when we look at the embryos, 28% of the embryos which had above average activity, 78% of those embryos resulted in pregnancy. In our third study, 72 in vivo derived embryos were collected and videos were recorded while in holding media. The embryos were transferred to a 1.5 molar ethylene glycol solution, and a second video was recorded prior to freezing. Overall, embryos in the holding media, here in the green box, had higher morphokinetic activity than embryos in the ethylene glycol solution. This could be expected because ethylene glycol inhibits oxidative phosphorylation and respiration, so we would expect lower activity levels. In summary, embryo morphokinetic activity can be detected using graphic image processing techniques. An analysis of this activity may provide objective information to predict embryo survival of cryopreservation. I would like to thank my teammates for data collection, data analysis, and help with this presentation. Thank you for your time.